Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I wanted to learn more about Afghanistan and why our country's there and whether we should be there or not. And so I'm told there's no better person to talk to than NYU professor Patricia DeGennaro. So welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Now, you are a professor and teach courses that are very intimidating sounding. List some of them.
Well, I've taught courses on U.S. foreign policy, national security, terrorism and the war on terrorism. Also, most recently, a course on international interventions, which focused specifically on the intervention in Afghanistan.
And you're a fellow.
Right, at the World Policy Institute,
right,
where I work mostly on the relationship between civilians and the military. So I'm looking at that particular dynamic that's it's being talked about quite a bit right now.
So you spent a lot of time this past year in Afghanistan.
I did. I've been there 3 times, almost 7 months altogether.
Isn't that amazing? I don't have any idea of what it's like. It's not like Iraq.
No.
I mean, you don't find it a city like Baghdad.
Right. No, the beauty about all of these countries is that when you visit any country, it's very different from the next. You know, sometimes we have this concept that every place is the same, and it really isn't.
Right.
Even though there are similarities, maybe in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they're not necessarily the same type of
But they're more different than, say, New York City, London, and Rome.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, they differ from each other much more than that.
They do. It's, you know, Afghanistan has been through a drought for a very long time now, so most of the country is very dusty and very dry. And so you're always dealing with, you know, the dust getting in your hair and all of those things. And not to mention the buildings are lower.
Right.
Some, maybe like the old village, no more than a couple stories high. Now with some of the economic influx, some of the hotels that are going up are higher than that. But
do towns have sidewalks?
They do have sidewalks. They do. And next to those sidewalks, unfortunately, they do have a lot of open sewers still around the country. But you have to remember, this is a country that has been at war for over 30 years, has not had a chance to develop because it's been too busy fighting off invaders, basically.
But it's had a history of that, hasn't it?
A history, absolutely. From Peter the Great to the King of Iran.
There's a Rudyard Kipling poem that my husband always quotes, and it's something about, let's get out of Afghanistan. It's the, you know, there's nothing that we shouldn't be there anyway. So
I think the opposite is people fall in love with it. They really do. I mean, there's some kind of just... I don't know, there's something that draws you there that, you know, you just really fall in love with the country.
It's truly like a different world, I guess.
It's absolutely a different world and a long time ago.
Right. Do people, it's
like being in the past, really,
Do any people wear Western dress?
Most people don't. Some of the reporters you'll see are some Western women who are trying to make a bit of a statement, but most of the time it's not worth it to wear Western dress because you're not respected in the same way, particularly women. You're not looked at in the same way. So especially for me, when I was working with parliamentarians and people in the president's office, for example, for me, not to be respectful to the culture it's just not my fight right now.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to come later, I believe.
What were you doing there?
Well, that remains to be seen. Well, I've done several things while I've been during my different visits, and I had an opportunity the first time to visit several of the provinces and meet with governors. And this is really an opportunity because you can see the differences in the provinces and how they're run. And I also had an opportunity to visit the only province, Bamiyan, which is run by a woman governor.
Oh.
And how distinctly she governed, which was different than most of the men.
That's so interesting because I have, you know, I'm very strong advocate of women being involved in policy making because I do believe there's a woman's perspective and everything else.
There is.
Yeah. So what are the governors? I mean, we hear about these warlords and tribes. Are they, the governors, are they representing their own forces?
They are.
How did the woman get?
Well, the governors are appointed by the president.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so President Karzai had worked on, with consultation with the U.S. government, basically appointing the governors who were probably the most strong individuals in each of the provinces. Right. And these individuals were also fighters during the Soviet war with Afghanistan. So they were known to be warlords in their area. I'm not so sure I would describe them exactly that way.
Yeah.
But
some of them.
Some of them are. And some of them are making transitions now and others are not. It's a very complex situation, and it's tough to say that anybody can even be
Were we right
expert.
back in the early part of the century to get involved in Afghanistan the way we did?
I think the invasion probably would have not happened unless we also threatened to get involved. The Russian invasion happened because they were invited by the current leader at that time. He was afraid he was going to get overthrown. The tradition, I mean, almost every single leader in that country has been violently overthrown, and this was his fear at that time. The Soviets were apprehensive, but they were talked into it, so to speak.
And then they had a terrible time.
They had a terrible time. So I don't even know if it was necessary that we got involved. However, we did give armaments to the Afghans to be able to fight them off more.
The Taliban.
Yeah, the Taliban and the Mujahideen fighters.
Right. So then after 2001, was that when we went in more? What happened then?
Well, after 2001, the reasoning there was due to 9/11.
Right. Yeah.
The attackers from 9/11 were in Afghanistan. They were in the southern region. They had their bases there, and they were pretty much allowed to live there.
So we went in there, but when we went in there, was it considered to be a localized action?
It was considered initially to be a localized action against the Taliban. Right. And it grew from there basically because we had asked the Taliban to help us find these people, and they refused to do so. So then they became the next target of the Bush administration.
we went to war more or less with the Taliban.
Yes.
And then they were defeated in a way.
In a way.
Right.
I wouldn't say they were ever defeated,
right.
No.
But they were pushed back.
They were pushed back into Pakistan territory.
And then we got involved in that election, I guess, in Karzai, in the election of the first president.
Mm-hmm. There was a.
I just don't know how we got sucked into where we are today.
Well, I think the international community at that point decided that they couldn't just leave Afghanistan basically in a non-governance state because of the terrorism issue. So the international community basically got together in what is known as the Bonn Agreement and brought some Afghan expatriates who had left the country some time ago and tried to work on building and restructuring a new government. So they wrote a constitution and they decided on a presidential system then, which I would have to say some of the Afghans there preferred a parliamentarian system, but I think there was a bit of an East-West dynamic going on there.
So we pushed.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. And now we're there,
yeah.
And the rest of the world doesn't seem to be, the rest of our allies don't seem to be as interested in being there as we are.
Well, initially, the Bush administration went in alone. Although it was the first time the NATO partners had initiated what they call Article 5. And Article 5 means that if one NATO partner is attacked, all of NATO will band together and defend that ally. And this was what happened during 9/11. So the NATO partners were there absolutely to help the United States, but the Bush administration decided right off that they would like to go this alone.
Oh, I see.
So probably about a year or so after that, they then decided that it was not something they could do alone and they would like international support. So then the NATO partners came in. So it wasn't very well coordinated or thought out. So there you have some of the problems that began very early.
And their support is waning, isn't it?
It is waning, absolutely, and it's a constituency.
Yeah.
You know, most Europeans don't want to see war continue. They understand what war looks like. It's also a European historical outlook in this context. Yeah. So they prefer to work things more diplomatically and from a development effort. I mean, I'm being very general here.
Right. Well, that's what we said too, isn't it? That we were going to do the development, but we never seem to have done it.
Well,
Is that part of the culture of the country that we seem to have been faced with so much of diverting those funds to other things? Is it corruption? Do we just call it that?
There's absolutely a ton, absolutely inefficiency, a lot of corruption, but I think it stems from several things. And the first thing is that it's very difficult in a time of war where things are very dangerous for people to go in and build. And since Afghanistan is seeing itself in the situation of a war, it's not viewing developers and soldiers to be separate entities, basically.
And how many Afghani have we estimated have been killed, or they've estimated?
Well, I think the numbers vary because the Defense Department doesn't really keep track of casualties, but it's been people say somewhere between 50 and 30,000, 15, I'm sorry, and 30,000.
Now, so originally, I mean, you hear different reasons of why we're there. We're there because we wanted to find Al-Qaeda, whatever.
Al-Qaeda,
We're there because we wanted to get those people, and we were going to leave then if we were able to kill Osama bin Laden, were we?
I think it's, initially I believe that was the idea, but when any government decides that there are extra interests or there are other interests which go beyond the initial context of intervention, they're going to recalculate what their strategy is or how they're going to move forward towards the intervention.
But then the other reason you hear is that we want to stabilize the Middle East, and we don't.
I think that was part of the reasoning for Iraq.
And what we've done is we've managed to destabilize the entire region, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's a crucial kind of place. If you've got Pakistan, you've got Afghanistan, and then Iraq and Iran. So do you think we should be there? What do you think we should do? If you were president, what would you do?
Well, I'm extremely torn, and I'm actually putting together an article right now that hopefully will be coming out of El Diario La Prensa at the end of the week, thinking about the next steps. Obama's supposed to be coming out with 50 benchmarks on September 24th, so we'll see where they're going to go.
What do they mean by that?
They'll have certain basically goals that they'll look at to see if they're succeeding. So they'll say, okay, we want to do A, then we want to do B, then we want to do C, and are we achieving those benchmarks or not? As I said earlier, when you're in Afghanistan, you somehow get very attached to the country and the people. The people are they're very warm, although Afghans are very serious and very tenacious about how they're treated.
But they're very poor.
They're very poor.
And they're really not an educated population.
No. So you get very torn between wanting to stay or go. Yeah. And I think some of us who understand there's very large connections and we're very interconnected in the world and how our behaviors influence each other, we're saying, okay, we've disrupted a lot of the life and the situation there. So what is now, our responsibility in changing that or helping to change that so the Afghans can then be in control of their country.
So the discussion now centers around the Afghan police and military. Can we develop it enough?
Mm-hmm. Right. So they can take control and defend their own country. And I mean, this is again a difficult situation because the country has been at war for 30 years. A lot of that war has been between the different sects or the different what we call tribes or communities within the country. So a lot of what I think is that we should work on a reconciliation process first, and then allow the Afghans to say, okay, this is the type of government I want. I mean, we have an opportunity right now with the elections not being decided to say, okay, let's do a do-over, basically. Let's start over and let's get they have a thing called a jirga, which is basically a grand assembly where they bring in tribal elders and leaders And they really, I mean, it's a very democratic process, except unfortunately it doesn't usually include women.
Should it be a federation of these different states?
Well,
Is that one of the solutions?
I think that's one of the ideas, and it's something that probably would work more effectively there. But again, it's for the Afghans really to decide that.
Yeah, that's what bothers me. I mean, it's such a different country. It has such a different culture. It has such different interests. They don't aspire to be, making a lot of money or being very successful. I mean, they want to survive, right? And we go into, I don't know. Do we do it with an understanding? Are we of finesse an understanding that we're going to do what they want and not what we want?
Well, I think sometimes we work backwards. We go in understanding what we want, and then we figure out we can't move forward or be successful if we don't work on what they want. And in fact, that's how and where the situation is going now. I mean, the military is being trained much more on culture and language now than they were prior to going in. There are a lot of international community and development officials that went in and didn't understand the country either because people didn't want to go there. It was dangerous. Yeah. So this is all changing now.
Yeah. How many of us are able to speak the language?
Not very many.
So that makes it even harder, right?
Right.
So if you were president, let's go back to this. What would you do?
If I were president, I think that's what I would do first, is take this opportunity to have a start over almost.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't completely withdraw. That's not as easy as it sounds. But however, I would call a jirga immediately to start working on a process of reconciliation within the country, a process of allowing the elders to decide what kind of mechanism they would like to have the governance, and then what kind of constitution they want. As the West, we can impose a little bit because we're giving them the space to be able to do this.
So we could be facilitators in a conference, in a giant conference. Right. Is that what it's like?
I think it's like being a process consultant.
Yeah. Yes.
That you're there trying to help and facilitate the process, and within that you make recommendations like, well, don't you think your daughters also need to go to school, and don't you think your wives should also have some kind of reconciliation, or you know what, they have to be here as well in the second round.
Right. And how are we doing in Iraq? I mean, as long as I have you here.
Well, we're doing much better in Iraq, but I think there as well we've allowed a situation to
really
fester where we've created small militias that are now fighting each other. So it's not even as much a secular fight within Iraq as it is these small militias who actually we helped arm to enforce the law and hold the communities so they could be able to develop. We've almost created a worse situation. This idea of handing out arms all the time really needs to be rethought.
It is really shocking, isn't it, that the United States provides the most, I mean, the amount of armament that we supply to the world really seems to be very basic and very ridiculous. It's just outrageous, I think.
It's absolutely shocking. And not only we provide the most, but I mean the drastic difference between us and then the next people. It's billions and billions of dollars.
It's incredible. In Iraq, I read that the Sunnis and the Shia get along, or did get along.
They were pretty much forced to get along under Saddam, and I think that caused some of the problems.
That's in Iraq, but I didn't mean that. I meant in Afghanistan.
Oh, in Afghanistan? The problems...
There were much less number, right, of Shia?
There were a much less number of Shia. And in fact, the problems in Afghanistan stem more from ethnicity than religion. So there's fights between the Pashtuns and the Uzbeks, for example, or the Tajik ethnics, or the Hazara, which are the Shiite community, which are in the Bamiyan district.
And they live in their own
different areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Of the country.
Now, there is also a distinction between, I guess that's in Pakistan, the distinction between the army and the police. In Pakistan. Is there that distinction in Afghanistan also?
Well, yes. There always has been a distinction between the army and the police. However, the police are a very corrupt entity, and people don't, usually in developing countries, the police are the last entity to really develop. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's usually...
It's an interesting phenomenon.
I think because they're paid so little, they don't have very good training, and they are always looking for ways to have a better life and more money within their purview and more power. I mean, individuals like...
Yeah, power.
Power.
So let's summarize it, because I think we're getting near the end. In Iraq, we are withdrawing slowly.
We are withdrawing slowly.
And you're optimistic that we will withdraw with some base.
We will have a small amount of military on the base.
And
there.
are we in there now providing development assistance and guidance and money? And it's working?
It's working much better there. Because again, the difference there's a much difference in Iraq. I mean, Iraqis they ran a state. They're very well educated.
They're sophisticated.
They're more sophisticated.
They have taller buildings.
Well, but that doesn't mean they're still not fighting,
No,
and they still don't have internal
Right.
issues and problems.
Right.
But Afghans are 80% illiterate. They have the highest infant mortality rate in the world, and I mean, it's a much different situation. And they are really fighting for their country when you're looking at the insurgents and pushback to the U.S. presence, even though we don't feel that that's the reason we're there.
Yeah. So we should not want to keep supporting Karzai, right? Do we or do we not?
Well, again, I think we need to let that up to the Afghans.
Yes.
And we need to give them the space. You know, they're in the military, they call the strategy right now clear, control and build. So basically what we want to do is hold that space so they can build their own government and they can decide who they need to have as a leader.
So the women, how did you get into this field?
It's been a passion ever since I was very little. I always felt that we could work as the most powerful country in the world to help people achieve and prosper just like we do.
Rather than destroy.
Yeah. I mean, from a very early age, I didn't see why we couldn't use our power for good.
Do you want to work in the government? Have you ever done that?
Well, I have worked on contract with the government before, and I've worked on in the Senate. But I think your voice is less controlled when you're out of the government, and everybody has a niche and everybody has a job, and my job is to push from the outside a little bit.
So if you are you have a woman's point of view about all of this. The women all over, are they organizing? There are groups that lend support and assistance. I know in Iraq, and we do talk about the ignorance and lack of education and freedom in Afghanistan, but what are we doing about it? Is that the way to go about it?
Well, there are a lot of women's groups that are organizing. The problem I always have, or the concern I should say that I always have, is that we don't get too focused on our own advocacy.
Right.
Because things...
I mean, putting our things on top of them.
I mean, for example, I was at a UN discussion on Afghanistan and the legal system, and a woman gets up in the back and she says, well, what about women? And I thought to myself, well, women will benefit under a better legal system, so that's the larger picture. It's not just saying women.
Yeah.
It's looking at how things are interconnected at a larger level. That's where we need to be.
So where do we hear your voice? How do we do that?
Several ways. Well, I write a lot for Huffington Post, so I'm on Huffington Post quite a bit. I also have a blog site which is called Trisha's Take that doesn't get too much reading, but it's getting out there. And also through the Women's Media Center and in El Dario La Prensa this week, hopefully.
Good for you.
So,
yeah. And do you find you have women students?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of women students.
A lot of them?
Yeah, they're very interested in bringing their perspective.
It's very interesting. I read an article you did where you said that that Obama shouldn't appoint Hillary Clinton, and then when you read the other day in the paper, it was interesting about the disagreements in the White House, and that she's really a hawk, and against that. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But there have been so many more women recently involved in foreign policy and around the world from this country than there when I was younger. I mean, it was incredible. We've had a female Secretary of State, and Albright. Does that mean that the Secretary of State is not as important as the Secretary of Defense?
Right now, no. The Secretary of State is not. The way that we're focusing our foreign policy, I mean, quite blatantly, no, it's not. And I had feared that Mrs. Clinton would keep this trend. And again, as a caveat, I work a bit with the military. I work on civil-military relations with the Army, and I don't disrespect them. I respect them very highly. I just think that we need a robust civilian group as well, which we have taken from over the years. We have few civilians that are ready to go to Afghanistan. We're taking people that are unexperienced. They're not ready to be in this type of country. They don't know how to deal with different cultures and societies. They don't have a lot of experience, and that's not to say they're not skilled or very good people, but we need the best people we can get in these areas. And we're taking the money from state and giving it to defense and relying on our soldiers to do the work civilians should be doing. And I want Hillary to fight to bring that back into the State Department and to the United States Development Agency.
It's interesting, though, because it changed. I mean, it really changed. Do you think Alan Albright was more active or had more to say?
Well, I think there was less focus on the military, and once 9/11 happened, George Bush...
Then it switched.
Yeah, it switched. Yeah. Not that the USAID and the state was getting the money they should have been getting or deserved, and also training the people necessary for the future. I mean, the military's training for 24 years down, 30 years down the road. Our State Department should be doing the same thing.
But instead we're just catching everything.
Exactly.
So we've come to the end of this program. I'm a little wiser than I was. Thank you.
So I hope I was able to
and
shed
I
a
can
little
read
light.
that, and I'm going to definitely read you on the Huffington Post. I'm going to look at your website, your blog, so we can do that. And I guess you were pleased when Obama said he wanted to talk to Iran, to the people in Iran.
Yeah, very pleased about that. I think it's better to engage people and talk to them because you
makes so much more sense.
Yeah, assumptions get us nowhere. Right. Communication gets us much further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It goes so quickly, doesn't it?
I know. Can we have another hour?
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.